All right, hello and welcome back to these slides. So we'll finish them up and then start some new ones today. So we ended talking about computer science and how it's being used in like medicine and science and all this cool stuff all the way to Mars, right? And the farthest we got was protein folding. All right, so now it's time for a new section to talk about how computer science is being used in finance, and I would like to talk about cryptocurrency, which is a very fun, hot topic these days, right? And I'm very excited because, I don't know if I can show you, but like all these colors that I pick for the backgrounds of these slides, here we go, they're in order, and it just so happens that we wrapped around to green, and that is the color of money, so I'm very excited about that. So let us continue. And let's talk about Bitcoin. So that's probably the most popular cryptocurrency. I think we could all argue that. And so I would like to give you the details about Bitcoin, and you can more or less apply that to all the other cryptocurrencies. Some are slightly different, but they all have a similar feel to them. Okay, so Bitcoin is the most popular. It has its own little symbol. And I'm not going to teach you how to mine it yourself or something. I'm going to be talking at a very, very high level just so that we have an idea of it and we can talk about it from the point of view of this class. So I guess let's start with a definition. What even is crypto? What is cryptocurrency? Because that's what crypto is short for. It's just money, but it's completely electronic. It's like instead of dollar signs, we have like zeros and ones, which tell us how much money we have, and make sure that nobody else can steal our money unless we want to give our Bitcoin to someone else. Nobody can take it from us, okay? And the way it does that is it uses encryption. So it uses stuff like RSA, which we talked about. It uses encryption properties to make sure that, first of all, we're not sure like who has so much money. Maybe like here's me with 2 Bitcoin, and here is my cat with 3 Bitcoin. We have no clue, as far as Bitcoin is concerned, who has what, because my name isn't there. It's just some numbers which I know about, okay? Instead of Lawton, it's a bunch of ones and zeros. Instead of Alonzo, it's a bunch of ones and zeros. And these are like the addresses of your wallet, okay? It's like a virtual little wallet thing, and it makes sure that we're not sure, which is a weird thing to say. It makes sure that we're not sure who has what, okay? And then also, it makes sure that because of that, like if I give money to Lonzo, people just see these numbers. So like, okay, this account gave money to this account, but we have no clue who owns these accounts, okay? That is the idea, and it was created quite a long time ago. It wasn't popular until much more recently, of course, but it was created back in 2009, and it was created by someone who called themselves Satoshi Nakamoto, but that is a pseudonym, which means this is not a real person. We have no clue who really made Bitcoin, okay? Which is fun to think about. So yeah, cryptocurrencies, they're super hard to track because you just have these numbers. Those are your addresses, okay? Addresses. You have wallets. And these kind of go hand in hand, these weird little terms. And so they're very hard to track, okay? Like all of the tax people hate this in every country because it's very easy to like mine a bunch of Bitcoin, tell nobody about it, and then exchange it for goods on the black market or something. Okay, that's the idea. And there have been a bunch of people who wanted to ride Bitcoin's wave, and only a few have been popular. Those are usually called, the umbrella term is altcoins, or alternate cryptocurrency, alternate coins. But none of them are as popular as Bitcoin. Probably the most popular one is Ethereum, right? But still, Bitcoin is like worth $50,000, and Ethereum is worth like $2,000. So that is a high-level nutshell idea about Bitcoin. Let's talk about how it's all stored. Like how can you give money to somebody virtually? Like what does that even mean? So Bitcoin, similar to like BitTorrent or all the file sharing pieces of software we've talked about before. It's a peer-to-peer network. So you got a bunch of computers who are all talking to each other. Okay, so again, like here's a computer, a laptop, here's a desktop, and here's other circular computers, and they're all talking to each other on this Bitcoin network, and they're agreeing about like who has how much money. Okay, that's the idea. So this is all of Bitcoin. It needs to be part of a network. Okay, so all these computers are talking to each other. This is the Bitcoin network. All right, and this whole thing is powered by encryption again, which makes it so that we're not sure who has what, but everybody still agrees on the amounts that each account holds. Okay, so yeah, if you remember RSA, the account number just so happens to be a public key. It's something that you give away. If you want somebody to pay you, they know your account number. Like here's my account. It's account. Maybe it is 1, 2, 3, 4, and I can just give people this number, and if they send money on the Bitcoin network to this number, I will have received it. Okay, it's a public key. I'm sharing it with everybody. But even though everybody gets to see this address, this place where I'm holding my money, where my wallet is, they cannot spend my money. They can't say, okay, 1, 2, 3, 4 wants to send $500 to Lonzo. No, my cat cannot steal my identity like that, because there's also an associated private key, which unlocks, okay, which unlocks this account to actually give like $500. It takes that key, okay, private key. That's the idea. Okay, so that is the first part. Now, you also may have heard of this word called the blockchain, which is a very interesting concept. So, you know how when you, like maybe back in the day when people checked into hotels, there would be like a ledger where you're like, okay, this person arrived at this time, this person arrived at this time, this person checked out at this time, this other person checked out at this time. That's essentially what's going on with Bitcoin. But they never throw away these papers. So from the beginning of Bitcoin, they just have a really long stack of papers saying, okay, Lawton paid Lonzo this much, Lonzo paid Lawton this much, Lonzo mined this much on this day, okay? And that's how they all agree, because everybody has this blockchain thing. It's just a really big file indicating who's given money to who. Everybody agrees on that, okay? All these computers on the network have their own copy of that file. It's called the blockchain. They all have their own little copy, and they all agree on it. And that's the beauty of computer science algorithms. Okay? There's a way for all of these to obtain what's called consensus, to agree on, okay, yes, Lawton really did send this money. It's not an attack. Okay? So, yeah. If you read through this entire ledger, this entire blockchain, you know exactly how much money each account has, and that's what's really happening. Okay? So everybody has that copy, and so they know who has how much money, and so they, because they have to agree, if I only have like $250 in my account, I can't spend $500. All the other computers are going to be like, no, bro, you don't have that much money. It's not happening. Okay? They all have to agree, which is a very, very interesting topic in itself. You can teach an entire class on how these computers agree with each other. I took one in grad school. It's insane, okay? Everybody gets to see this transaction, and yet nobody knows who's really behind each account. It's wonderful. All right, so that's the blockchain, and you might be wondering then, well, what if I just get a bunch of computers to agree? They're like, okay, 3 computers are like, yeah, Lawton's sending $500 to Lonzo, even though I really didn't want to. This is where numbers comes into play, okay? So, again, if you're a horrible person, let's pretend that my cat is a malicious user. Maybe he wants to write onto the blockchain, hey, my account gets 1,000 Bitcoins from Lawton. Okay? And this is not going to work because everybody's talking to each other. They're all trying to agree on what the blockchain should look like. Okay? They all have that little copy. They're all connected eventually to each other. Okay? That's the idea. And so that's like the network. And if just a few people are like, okay, I want to spend all of Lawton's money, the rest, the majority, are going to say no. Okay? Okay? That is wonderful and useful. Okay, so strength in numbers. That's wonderful. Majority rules. So the idea is you need at least 50% of the computers in the entire network to agree in order for a transaction to go through. That means it takes a little while. It takes a few minutes to spend money on Bitcoin, which may or may not be a good thing depending on your views, but that's how it works. That does mean, though, it's capable of being attacked. Unfortunately, this network could be taken over if you had enough computational power. If you had a ton of it, if you were maybe a country and you used all of your resources, you could potentially send money places. You could overwrite this blockchain and everybody would be forced to agree with you because you own the network at that point. Okay? So this would make Bitcoin useless if this were happening to it, and luckily this has never happened, I don't think, to Bitcoin, yet at least. And as it grows over time, this is harder and harder to do because more and more computers are getting on this network, which is nice. Okay, but many altcoins, alternative cryptocurrency, they have had this majority attack because you don't need a whole lot of computers because not a whole lot of people are on these alternative networks, which is unfortunate. And that's how people lose a lot of money. Okay, so that is kind of how the network works and how it achieves consensus and how it can be, unfortunately, brought down if you had enough power. You may have also heard the term mining. I said it a couple times, but let's talk about that now. Okay, that's like the last piece of the puzzle. So what in the world does mining mean? So in Bitcoin, you have to be on this network. Like, there's a lot of computers. It takes a ton of them, and the more the better so that you can't have these attacks. And they all have to store a giant file, right? That blockchain. They all have to agree. They have to talk to each other. It costs electricity. It costs internet costs. That needs some kind of incentive, okay? And so this is what was baked into Bitcoin, an incentive for people to want to put their computers on the network and copy off the blockchain so that we have that strength in numbers, okay? So every time a couple transactions get made, there's, for lack of a better term, there's a lottery that happens, okay? It's like everybody who's participating, trying to agree on this blockchain, this new thing that they're adding, these new lines to it, they actually get some Bitcoin. Some of the people that are just sitting around trying to achieve consensus on the network are getting some of their own Bitcoin. It's like they're digging it out of the ground. It's called mining, okay? So some amount of Bitcoin gets generated and sent to the lucky participant. The idea is the network says, okay, I want you to find me a very fancy number that maybe starts with like 10 zeros and then has something else at the end that we can prove that you did a lot of work to get here. Okay, everybody, the person who finds this fancy special number gets some Bitcoin. That's what really happens. Okay, I'd be happy to talk to you about this more in office hours. This is as high of a level as I want to go, though. So yeah, this is essentially how money's getting printed in the Bitcoin world, because at the very beginning there was no, nobody had any Bitcoin. None existed. This is how more Bitcoin gets to exist. It's like how the supply gets to get pushed out to people. Unfortunately, or fortunately, one day the supply is programmed to run out. The incentive, like it gives you this much Bitcoin, and then it's going to level off and eventually hit zero. Okay? And therefore there will no longer be an incentive. There will no longer be any extra Bitcoin in the world. There will be a cap on how much you can have. And that is that. So that is the fate of Bitcoin. It's going to be a few decades before this ever happens, but maybe you want to sell before then. Okay? That's the idea. And I think I have an old amount on here. So let me go and replace this, and then I'll be right back, and we'll talk about if this is okay or not. Here we go. And it might be fun to keep the previous prices from, like this one's from last semester up there, just see how it's changing. So yeah, apparently if you owned one Bitcoin, that is going to give you back this much money, over $50,000, almost $60,000 as of about a week ago, apparently. So that's crazy. Isn't that fun? So I guess the question, because we're in a critical thinking class, is this okay to do? Should we have cryptocurrency in the world? Is that Is that all right? So let's talk about the good and the bad. So the very first things that happened on Bitcoin, I think the first thing that was really ever bought was a pizza, which is nice and innocuous. But most people using Bitcoin back in the day, they were using them to like buy drugs, to do black market things. And that is because of some of the nice properties that Bitcoin gives criminals. Governments can't track whose account is associated with who, as long as you're just sending money over Bitcoin. Okay, the second you try to cash out, then somebody saves a record of that. But as long as you keep your money inside of Bitcoin and just move it around, then you can't really track that ownership or spending. It's just a bunch of numbers with accounts that nobody knows who those are linked to. Okay, that's kind of like on the ethical side. Then like the practical side is the exchange rate for Bitcoin. It's like all over the place. It's getting bigger, but we don't know how long that'll last. There is no guarantee on this exchange rate because like no governments want to back Bitcoin because it's dangerous to them, right? So the whole reason like our dollar doesn't like crash tomorrow is because our government has made some promises to some people to pay them things. Okay, that is how the economy works, right? So because there's no real backing by anyone with any power, Bitcoin doesn't really have any clout. Okay, it could go away tomorrow, and there'd be nobody to try and fight for it. But this is another reason, like a lot of people love it because it goes up and down. People can make a lot of money this way. Okay, so I guess the question is, what would our boys think about this? What would Kant think, and what would Mill think? If we go back to them. So I think Kant would probably be, of course, about his individual rights. People are going to pay their taxes when they cash out on their Bitcoin account. Just let them do that. It's fine. We should allow Bitcoin. I think Kant would be about that. Okay. Mill, on the other hand, would try to weigh the options, right? Like, okay, what has the most utility here? And we have to consider every point of view. We have to consider the government's point of view, the people's point of view, everyone in the world, right? So that is the idea. And then there's also like the environmental cost, which is something that has been highlighted these days. More illicit activity, environmental cost. The last thing that I read was the amount of energy that is being used by all the computers on the Bitcoin network is the amount of energy that's used by Argentina. Okay, so that's an insane amount. And so that's going to really hurry up global warming, right? That's unfortunate. So governments are probably not happy about this, and so Mill would have to like weigh those options, like because governments are going to get less taxes because people aren't going to claim their Bitcoin winnings. There's going to be more illicit activity, potentially more illicit activity because people can buy things on black markets and not be tracked. And then we have such a huge energy cost to mine Bitcoin and stay on the network. And yeah, that's the idea. But on the other hand, Mill would also consider freedom, individual freedom, because it's good to not be tracked. It's nice to like be able to spend your money in the way you want to. Okay, as long as you're not hurting anybody, perhaps. So those are the two things, and I think you could argue either way for utilitarianism. So that is cryptocurrency in a nutshell. We talked just about Bitcoin, but it's a fun little topic. Okay, so that's how computer science is being used in finance and a bunch of other disciplines. So that's all I have for you in these slides. Now I would like to switch gears and talk about another fun topic, another buzzword that you might have heard about because it's in a lot of fields. It's called game theory. Okay, so let's talk about playing games. Why not? So I guess my first example for you is about corn. Okay, we are from an agricultural region. Fresno State has wonderful corn. Let's talk about this. Here's my example. So let's pretend that there are two corn producers, okay, producer A, producer B, and they need to figure out like what price, because they want to build a business and make money, what price should they sell their goods at, their corn and corn accessories. Okay, so here are your options. If one of the growers sells high, that means they sell for a big cost. Like you've got your two competing corn stands. Like here's your first stand with the person 1 manning it, farmer 1, and here's farmer 2 over here. So there's going to be a bit of competition between them. Like here's farmer A, farmer B. If one sells for a lot of money, like $50 for an ear of corn, the other one's probably going to sell low, like, okay, $3 for an ear of corn, and everybody's going to go here, right? Everybody's going to buy the same corn from producer B, okay? Assuming it's the same kind of corn. So everyone's going to flock to producer B, and game theory, the idea of game theory, is it's going to tell us that the prices are going to be driven down for the more expensive producer. If this person wants to stay in business at all, they are going to reduce their prices. Okay, so that's the idea. They are going to come down to $3 if farmer B is not budging. Okay, and so you can see this at a smaller level with like gas stations, right? There will eventually be an equilibrium, more or less. So eventually maybe B will come up a little bit and A will meet them there. That's the idea. There's like some give and take, but there will be an equilibrium that eventually gets met. Okay? So that is kind of the idea of game theory. Game theory is going to tell us, it's going to give us some tools to explain why this happens, even though it seems kind of intuitive, and why corn will be nice and cheap for us. Okay? That's the idea. I guess the only other option, though, is the two sellers could collude. They could talk to each other. There could be a little secret channel between them, and they could both be like, "Oh no, we're both going to sell this corn for $50," and they're the only corn sellers in Fresno. Okay, so you're forced to go to them, and they have just committed a felony, though. Okay, that's why there are some laws against that. They cannot do this. They cannot collude on the price. Okay, so and then of course game theory's not really going to explain when this happens, but that's why there are laws against it. Okay, so that is my little introduction. Let's talk about things other than corn now. So game theory was invented by a man named John Nash back in the day. This is him, and there was a movie made about him, if you've heard of A Beautiful Mind. It's a fun little film, and I encourage you to watch it after learning about this stuff. Okay, maybe it'll make a bit more sense. I think they do talk about his work a little bit, at least, in the movie. So, yeah, now it's time for real nitty-gritty. We're going to formally define the word game, which is funny, but let's get started. Okay, so a game, it is an interaction. It's a strategic interaction between individuals in situations. So people are involved, and they're trying to do something. Okay, so it's very vague, and so a lot of things can be determined, can be called a game, like figuring out corn prices. That's technically a game under this definition, right? So that's the idea there. And games can have different types, okay? Because this is a vague definition, we should try and make it a bit more concrete for different types of things. So the main types are cooperative and non-cooperative games, okay? So a cooperative game, and cooperative game theory studies when people are like trying to work together. They're cooperating, okay? And so they're going to form groups, and game theory, cooperative game theory that is, will explain why a group is going to want to be formed, because you're going to do better than you would by yourself, okay? So some games are cooperative like that. Others are non-cooperative, which means players cannot form alliances, or if they do, it's bad for them, okay? It is not in their best interest to get together with other people. There are certain games that cannot have groups involved, okay? And so I'm sure you can think of plenty of things which fit this definition from real life for cooperative and non-cooperative games, okay? And I encourage you to take a second to think about those, think of some examples, and then I'll give some more. So yeah, the idea with a non-cooperative game and what's studied in non-cooperative game theory is that if two people ever end up working together, that actually just means that they were threatened, okay? They had no choice. So they don't want to form alliances, though. Okay, that's the idea. So I guess, in a nutshell, cooperative game theory is about being fair. Fairness usually means that groups are better. And then non-cooperative game theory is all about winning. If you ever want to win over someone else, you're usually playing a non-cooperative game. Okay? That's the idea. So that is game theory in a nutshell. You've seen an example, you've seen some fancy definitions. And now I should tell you why I'm teaching it to you. It's a very, very hot topic, okay? It is being used in a lot of different places right now, and then there's also a computer science aspect, of course. So it's being used in econ, poli-sci, biology, philosophy. Everybody has taken a piece of this game theory cake. Figuring out what price to sell your goods at. Like, people are really playing, or I guess if you want to call it playing, they're doing game theory, okay, for weird things that you wouldn't think of that you wouldn't call it as games, okay? So people are writing a lot of programs. They're spending a ton of money to try and find what's called an optimal strategy for whatever game you're trying to play, like selling corn, for example. People are putting a lot of effort into doing that, okay? And so that's where the computer science comes in, because you can write programs to figure out the best thing that you can do in every situation. Okay, so let us go on to, I think that's where I want to stop. So let's go on to an example of non-cooperative games. We'll get to cooperative games, excuse me, in the next week, I think. So this is a fun, classic example of non-cooperative games. Do watch this video if you're interested. That's where I stole this particular example from, I think. But everybody gives an example. Every book on game theory gives the prisoner's dilemma. It's a very, very, very famous one. Okay, so here's the idea. You've got two prisoners. You may have heard this before. They're put into separate interrogation rooms. That's key. Okay, they can't hear each other. They can't talk to each other. And they're given options, okay? So they both committed some crime, apparently, or allegedly, and they are given some outcomes. These are the options if you do this thing, if you confess or you don't confess, okay? So here we go. Outcome one is if the first criminal confesses, that person's getting 0 years in prison. They get to walk out free, okay? And but they only get that if prisoner B doesn't confess, okay? So prisoner A rats out the two of them. Prisoner A gets 0 years in prison, and prisoner B, who did not confess, while A did, gets 10 years, okay? So that's a lot of time. It's unfortunate. So that's outcome one and outcome two. Or sorry, just outcome one for prisoner A and prisoner B. Okay, the other outcomes are the following. So the second way of this game being played is, okay, maybe prisoner A doesn't confess, but prisoner B does. And the same deal happens, but in the opposite order. So look at this. Isn't this fun? So you get prisoner A, who didn't confess, gets 10 years, but prisoner B gets 0 years. They get to walk out. Okay? Outcome three is prisoner A confesses and prisoner B confesses. You got both of them confessing. If they both do that, they will get 5 years in prison. Okay, so it's better than 10, but they're both getting 5 years if they both choose to confess. Okay, and then the final outcome is what you can assume is probably the best one, right, for them, is that, okay, if prisoner A didn't confess and prisoner B didn't confess, they both didn't confess, they just kept their mouths shut, they didn't say a thing, and they couldn't be convicted because of that, okay? So they both get to walk out if neither of them confesses, okay? But remember, they're in separate interrogation rooms, they can't talk to each other. So let's talk about these options. So, dun dun dun. I guess we need a grid. It's going to have 4 things in it. We have prisoner A up top, and prisoner B over here, and prisoner A can confess or not confess. Prisoner B can confess or not confess. Okay? And in either option, A gets a certain amount of time in jail, and so does B. Okay, so this is how we can fill out this little chart. I think I'll need it on the next slide, so that's useful for us. So if they both confess, that is this outcome. They both get 5 years in prison. If prisoner A doesn't confess, but prisoner B does, that means prisoner A gets 10 years and prisoner B gets 0. And it's flip-flop for this one. If prisoner A confesses, but B doesn't, A gets 0, B gets 10. And then finally, if they both don't confess, they both get 0 years in prison. Okay? So, I guess the question is, what do you think right now? What should they do? Like, what is the optimal outcome? And if you're anything like me, I would be circling this one right here. Like, yeah, just both of you shut your mouths. You will get to walk out of jail without any time at all. Okay? So, that's what we think should happen, right? Is that the equilibrium? What should they be doing? What is the optimal outcome? But we'll see. I'm going to try and prove to you that this is actually not the optimal outcome. Okay? That's what's not, it's not actually what's going to be weighted the heaviest, okay, in the actual game theoretical outcome. Okay? So, back to John Nash now. So, this game happens to have what's called a Nash equilibrium, and this is what he's famous for. It's when you can find an optimal solution to a problem that is like this. It's a non-cooperative game, so we'll find an optimal solution to the prisoner's dilemma problem. And so Nash, I think he based his PhD thesis around this thing, and it is completely unintuitive. Completely unintuitive, and so that's why we're talking about it. So this is not the equilibrium right here, though we think it should be. All right, so let us begin. I have a lot of words on this slide, and I'm sorry. So, when you have a Nash equilibrium, you have a few things. Okay, so when you have an equilibrium, that is a very hard word for me to say, I guess. That means you have like a set of strategies that you can always follow, one for each player. That means that you have the best strategy. Okay, you cannot do any better than this pre-approved set of strategies for each player. Okay, you can't do any better than those. It has the property that each player's choice is their best response to the choices of the other players. So you can't do any better than this thing called the Nash equilibrium. And the key idea behind it, and I'll show you some math that proves it, is that prisoner A has no clue like what prisoner B is going to do, right? And they know, like, they're probably like thinking, like, prisoner B's thinking that this is a good looking outcome for them, right? Oops, sorry. So this is where I want to go back to. They have to play it safe, and this is what we can mathematically actually formalize, the fact that these prisoners have to play it safe. Okay, that's what Nash equilibrium is. It's going to formalize this idea that in a non-cooperative game, you can't trust these people. You've got to play it safe. Your optimal outcome is not what you think it should be. Okay, it's not the best outcome. It's something different. Okay, it's a different kind of best. So another like more hand-wavy definition for a Nash equilibrium is when you have a law that nobody would want to break, even if there was no punishment for breaking it. Okay, that's like a colloquial idea of Nash equilibrium. And my example for you is stoplights. So obeying a stoplight is a Nash equilibrium, okay? Because if the light's red, you don't want to go, right? You still don't want to go. You want to follow this light because there's probably a car coming the other way, right? You shouldn't just put your foot on the gas and go through a red light. There's a reason it's red, and it's trying to like prevent you from dying, okay? So people all over the world, they're obeying stoplights every day, the vast majority of them, right? Because this is a Nash equilibrium. It's the best strategy. It's a self-enforcing law, okay? Even though there's not a cop sitting by every intersection, people are still stopping on the red lights, yeah? That's the idea. So that is the hand-wavy idea that I want you to have in the back of your mind for a Nash equilibrium. So now let's go back to the prisoners. So this is how we can determine the best case. Okay, this is how we can find the real Nash equilibrium, the thing that the prisoners are going to want to gravitate towards to try and minimize their time in jail. Okay, so the question is, for the prisoners, what is the average sentence for each outcome? Okay, and let me just do this on the next slide. Okay, I'll write it here so that you can go and look there before you go and read the rest of these bullets. What is the average sentence in each outcome? Okay, for each prisoner. Okay, that's the idea. Dun dun dun. So let's do some math now. So out of all of these, what is the average sentence? And it's symmetric for both, so we can just do. Let's just consider it from prisoner A's point of view. Okay, so prisoner A, if he confesses, he has these options. I'll like put a dotted line about them. And if he doesn't confess, he has these options. Okay, so this is prisoner A. And I think you can see it's symmetric for prisoner B if you consider them. So whatever is true for prisoner A will be true for prisoner B. So if he confesses, if he doesn't confess, so if prisoner A confesses, what's the average amount of time he will spend in jail across all the possibilities? So these two, because he can't control what B does. Like, he's a different person, and you can't talk to them, okay? They can't get their story straight or anything like that. So we have to consider both of these options. What is the average amount of time that A spends in jail if A confesses? Okay, so it's 5 plus 0 over 2. See that? Average. This is like average time in jail. So if he confesses, the average time spent in jail for A is 5 plus 0 over 2, which is 2.5 years. Okay, now let's look at the next one. Okay, this is the part where it's very, very unintuitive. You think that they'll both want to go and gravitate toward this one, but no, they're trying to do what's best for them. All right, so if prisoner A doesn't confess, let us average together the amount of time that he will potentially spend in prison because he can't control what B does. Okay, in both of these cases, if he doesn't confess, he might get lucky and B also doesn't confess and walk out of jail, but he also might be stuck in jail for 10 years because B might rat him out. See that? So we did those two, now we're doing these two. Maybe I'll double underline these so that they're separate. So let's average together 10 and 0, and we know what that is. It's over 2. That's 5 years. So what's the optimal strategy? What's the optimal strategy for prisoner A? You better believe he's going to confess. Okay? And this, of course, is symmetric. If you do it for prisoner B, you highlight these rows instead of columns. Same deal. Prisoner B is going to confess because the average amount of time that they spend in jail if they confess is much lower than if they don't. Okay? So isn't that fun? It's crazy. So it's not intuitive. It's really not intuitive. But that is why. Okay, so in the average case, it always makes the most sense to confess, which is not what you think about. And that's why this is a very important topic, and it's very popular. Okay? It seems like a paradox. It seems paradoxical. Like, obviously, they should just both not confess. But no, it's all about playing it safe. But game theory explains it away. We know now why prisoner A and prisoner B will both confess. Okay? And that's usually what's going to happen. Okay, so that is the Nash equilibrium, and that is all I have for you today. Before we go, I'd like to talk about your next essay, and so let me go and pull that up. Okay, so your next essay, and then we'll talk about the final next week. It's still a little early for that. So what I'd like you to do, this is your last essay of the class, right? You're finally there. You did it. So what I'd like you to do is just make your own essay. Whatever you want to talk about it. Okay, so it's going to be an 1,000-word essay, and it can be about whatever you want, okay? You're going to build your own essay, write about some topic. It must be related to computing, computer technology, the internet. So one of these things, it's got to be relevant to this class, okay? Just write about something that interests you. It should also have social and ethical implications, okay? So don't just like write about something silly that has to do with computers, okay? Write about something that's meaningful, and yeah, as long as you stay away from topics that were already on a previous essay, you're good to go. So just pick whatever you want, as long as it like has all of these pieces, and that is all you need. Go crazy. So yeah, just like pick apart both sides of the issue, whatever it is. Talk about any assumptions that people are making. Talk about any fallacies that people are trying to argue in favor of. Tell me what Kant and Mill might think. Whatever you think would be necessary to prove your point. Okay? I'm excited to read about what you choose to write about. Okay, so yeah, really go crazy. Just write with 1,000 words, and I would like you to cite quite a few sources though. Okay, this is going to be a longer essay. It's your last one, so let's finish strong. Please cite at least 4 works in this essay, however you want, and that is it. Okay, that's the last essay in this class. You did it. So this is what I have for you. Style and everything is the same. Ask me if you have any questions, but that is it. Okay, that's your final essay. You made it. So that is that, and that officially ends this lecture. So I'll see you in the programming one.